Sana ya do. Isana ya do. Isana ya do. Isana ya do. Isana ya do.
In the film The Stories of Our Lives, you present narratives in which LGBTI individuals tell us about their personal experiences and dreams. What was your motivation to collect these stories?
We were tired of one-sided narratives that would kind of place queer people in a box that other people had decided they were supposed to fit into, whether it was NGO medical narratives or church homophobe narratives or scandalous media kind of caricature narratives where people would act like it's a documentary of something extremely strange. And from our experience of like being, that's not what life is. That's not who we are. And so we were very interested in bringing to the table something that would consistently and strongly and boldly counter the mainstream kind of othering and marginalization. So there was that, and then there was how do we express being queer in Kenya, and what does it mean from one place to another, and what does it mean from one person to another, and all the things that kind of form that spectrum. So not just being queer in Nairobi per se, but what it means to be queer in other towns, Nakuru, Naivasha, all the places that we went and collected stories from, Eldoret, Kisii, Kisumu, and even all the places we didn't get to. So the project was about just asking people like some leading questions and then letting them kind of weave their experience in and out. And so we got all sorts of interesting stories. We got tragic ones and hilarious ones and epic ones. And
even, I guess, more than that, was that this project is also about us learning because even us, we are similar recipients of all these like narratives about what being queer is
and what otherness
like
is.
Every time you read an article in the paper in Kenya about queers, it's always pathologized. It's always like Kenyan gays demand, like there's a way the language is very, it others.
And the tone.
Yeah. And so
Kenyan gays asking for rights.
So even us as recipients of this kind of narrative, we were very curious about what is it like to be queer in Kenya? And so when we go out and collect all these stories and people make us laugh and people make us cry, then even us, we got a broader sense of what it means. Yeah. So it was also a learning experience for us.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The film was banned by the Film Classification Board. How do you explain this reaction, and how did people in Kenya react?
Well, Kenyans fight for access to things.
Yes.
So every time and it's not the first time that the board has restricted a film. It's been sad that it's been restricted because we really wanted the people who gave us the stories, first of all, to see the film because it's about them. And so the restriction has been kind of annoying for that reason, that we are not able to take the film back to the people who gave us the stories. And even now, we meet friends, we meet strangers who come and say, so how can we watch the film? We met some people here in Berlin who are like, it's so annoying that they have to come to Berlin to see a film that was made at home. But people really want to see the film.
Yeah.
The problem with the classification is that it sidesteps the conversation and it becomes about expression. So now the conversation about Stories of Our Lives in Kenya is very much about freedom of expression and what filmmakers are allowed to do in Kenya and not do.
And what they're allowed to say.
Rather than the core story of the queer experience. So it was kind of a sideshow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
one of the central questions in the movie is, shall I fight or shall I run? How would you describe the situation in general of LGBTI individuals in Kenya?
I know definitely the last story was written very much within that space of shall I fight or shall I run? And the last story was written around the time when there was a duplicate of the Ugandan bill that was brought to Parliament in Kenya. And so the entire queer community in Kenya had to ask themselves these questions of what happens if this bill goes through and it becomes illegal to be myself? And what does it mean to be a citizen of a country that outlaws a part of you? Which is like a weird thing to have to think about.
Yeah.
Because like a state is not supposed to legislate you,
Like
your existence.
being.
Yeah. And I think a majority of human beings don't ever have to answer that question.
Yeah.
We are alive.
We are.
And the stories we gathered from people are from people who are also alive.
Yeah.
We have, people who are negotiating being queer in a way that's very adult, and it's very, people are coming out to their families. They're having very hard conversations with their parents. Queer people can't get married, you can't adopt, you can't, and you can't really congregate in a way that's public, in the sense that you can't be on the streets having a pride parade and all those other like hallmarks of
And
queer life.
yes, and also, I mean even more fundamental things. You can't go and identify yourself as a queer person when you're seeking healthcare, for
Or
instance.
insurance.
Yes, or insurance.
Or
About the
church.
job situation.
Even for jobs, it can be tricky because
I think I'll say being an out queer person in Kenya is tricky. There are places where people will, and the kind of objection that Kenyans give you is a very silent, unspoken kind of rejection, where they won't tell you to your face that we don't want you here because you're queer, but you'll see it.
What are your hopes and wishes for the future? Are there any projects you're working on?
Well, definitely. I feel like the thing that we're working on right now is the book that's called Stories of Our Lives. And the original plan, even when we went out collecting the stories, was to do the book. It was to collect all these stories because there are so many. And the film was just like 6.
yeah,
It's like such a fraction of the body that we collected. So we've been working on like putting all these things together into a book that then gives you a much broader picture of what it feels like to be queer in Kenya. So that's the thing we're working on right now.
yeah,
But more than that, I think this year, since the film came out, has been such a process of growth and discovery for all of us as members of the collective, individually and as a group. So we understand a little better what film can do for narratives and for people and for lives.
We're always really excited when the film gets seen in different communities, because like it always kind of starts these very important conversations about the things that are the same, about human beings everywhere, and the things that are different, and which of those things are important, and how do we still negotiate love and triumph and rebellion and pain. Very, very human interactions. So we've always loved when things can move off paper and start living among like lives. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're still lucky.
Yeah.
It's a summary.